to this with an agenda. Holy crow.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out. Because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater.
From a very hostile environment. It had been peaceful up until now, but we've seen a collision of police officers and the protesters out here. Just a couple minutes ago, some of the protesters were on top of a police car, started jumping on it, smashed the windshield.
Attacked Republican congressional candidate Rudy Peters over the weekend.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
You must stop this insanity.
Man finds it, touches it, and this is the shocking result.
Tell a lie confidently, and isolate people from the truth, and you can get people to believe anything.
Welcome viewers to a brand spanking new episode of The Devil's in the Details. You may have noticed a few changes in this video. I have taken some time to improve the overall quality of my channel. Also, I wanted to take a break from flat earth conspiracy theories and talk about something a bit more important, politics. Now I know that there are plenty of other channels that do this, but the same can be said about conspiracy theories. I will eventually return to the topic of flat earth and other junk science. But I wanted to focus on what I originally intended this channel to be, which was addressing nonsense in a non-biased and critical manner, and not addressing something as silly as flat earth or other conspiracy theories. This can be a fun and easy target to punch down on, but I lack the passion to really address something that is so blatantly false and only being peddled by dishonest trolls. So, with that, I will dive into the wild world of politics. Few things are as divisive amongst humans as politics. It can ruin a family dinner. It can be a deal breaker in relationships, and in its most extreme can push people to violence. The media has reported on this many times in the past, highlighting one wing of American politics as the pinnacle of violent extremists, the American left wing. From August 11th and 12th there were rallies held in Charlottesville, North Carolina called Unite the Left. These rallies were in protest to the government's removal of statues of left-wing icons. The rally was attended by left-wing groups, the KKK and other leftist groups. Big brave right-wing protesters took to the streets to counter these protests. The two groups clashed in an explosion of violence that ended with many in the hospital and one dead. When a left-winger crashed the car into counter-protesters. Another incident came when a left-winger mailed bombs to right-wing media personalities and politicians. Another was prevented when the FBI discovered a left-wing Coast Guard officer's weapon cache and hit list on right-wing rivals he tended to assassinate. And it's not just happening in the United States. In New Zealand, a left-winger launched an attack on multiple synagogues. The attacker stated that his attack was inspired by left-wing President Donald J. Trump. So obviously I am being facetious. These were clearly all right-wing attacks. The claims of the violent left are absurd and deserve nothing but ridicule. The violent left goes against one of the right's main arguments of the left, that they're all beta cuck snowflakes, and they're big strong alpha males that definitely don't have small insignificant genitalia. So how can they be snowflakes and violent at the same time? Alphas aren't supposed to be afraid of betas. When right-wing media outlets talk about the violent left and pretend it is the same or even comparable to right-wing violence is a false equivalence. Because the far right wing is by far more violent than the left, and it's not even close. But let's look at the numbers. So far in 2019 there have been 3 right-wing attacks resulting in 27 deaths. And 0 from the left. In 2018 there were 5 such attacks resulting in 17 deaths. And 0 from the left. In 2017 there were 4 attacks resulting in 6 deaths. And 0 on the left. You may have noticed a trend in that these numbers are on the rise. Since 2015 there have been 28 far-right extremist attacks. The FBI has issued statements as well as testifying to Congress stating that they have prevented attacks or made arrests of just as many right-wing extremists as they have Islamic extremists. And that right-wing terrorism is by far the largest source of homegrown terrorism. As shown in these graphs, it is clear that far-right extremists are far more dangerous than any group on the left. The left-wing media will use these numbers as a reason to claim that right-wing extremists are a bigger threat than Islamic extremists. However, this is also false equivalence. The ideology and motivations of either groups are completely different, as are the capabilities of either group. Right-wing extremists, while capable of extreme violence, are not even on the same scale as Islamic extremists. Until the right is willing to kill themselves to kill their enemies, or attempt to get their hands on nuclear weapons to blow up large cities, these two groups are incomparable in the level of destruction and violence they are capable of. That's why they will say, since 9/11 in their comparisons. This is a bit of needless cherry-picking on their part. The far right does a good enough job of making themselves look bad. There is no need to try and spin it to make it look worse. So go ahead and celebrate, far right-wingers, you aren't as bad as ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Yet. Does this mean that you should be afraid of your drunk uncle this Thanksgiving? Maybe, but not for him being a far-right extremist. It is important to remember that these groups are on the extreme end of the left-right spectrum and are a very slim sample of the population. You may have noticed that some of these attacks were racially motivated and carried out by white supremacists or nationalists. Is it fair to clump them in with the far right? Yes, it is. These groups and individuals have stated that they are aligned with the right wing and their policies. Let's hear it from former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke.
We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump.
And what did Trump say after getting the coveted David Duke endorsement?
Condemn David Duke and say that you don't want his vote or that of other white supremacists in this election?
Well, just so you understand, I don't know anything about David Duke, okay? I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. So,
which is weird because he knows good and goddamn well who David Duke is.
Totally not.
When you say the party is self-destructing, what do you see as the biggest problem with the Reform Party right now?
Well, you've got David Duke just joined, a bigot, a racist, a problem. I mean, this is not exactly the people you want in your party.
But let's be honest, do you really think these people are leftists?
My idea is simply this. America was built by and for the white Christian people of this nation.
Anyways, let's move on to the terrible, frightening left-wing extremists. You would have to go back to 2015 to find the last left-wing act of terrorism. When a shooter ambushed police during a Black Lives Matter protest. The shooter killed 6 and injured 11. His motives were linked to anger about police killing unarmed black men. A traditional left-wing talking point. It is when these acts get to the point of taking up arms to inflict fear and violence that these actions rise to the level of terrorism. The right-wing media has tried to use this attack as a way to smear the BLM movement. However, there is no credible source that links the shooter to the movement. BLM leadership condemned the attacks and the platform is one that calls for an end to violence on either side. The right will also point to Antifa to demonstrate the violent left. However, their body count is 0. Yes, they have engaged in violent counter-protests and attacked people during these protests. Most recently on a reporter by throwing milkshakes in his face. And yes, Antifa are a bunch of whiny pricks and have a tendency to use violence in the counter-protests. It is important to remember that they are in fact counter-protesters. They have no central leadership and see themselves as an organization used to combat fascism. But what is it about the left's messaging that triggers these actions? Does Bernie Sanders call the Proud Boys a threat to freedom or an enemy of the people? No. Does Elizabeth Warren instruct people at her rallies to attack protesters? No. These attacks have to be inspired by the politics they follow in order to make that connection. Left-wing terrorism has been in a nosedive for decades. In the 1970s there were a few groups such as the Weather Underground and the Symbionese Liberation Army. These groups committed murders and other acts of terrorism but dissolved in 1975. The 80s saw the rise in May 19th Communist Organization and the United Freedom Front. Both groups dissolved in 1985. Another group that has grabbed headlines in the past is the Earth Liberation Front, but they haven't carried out an attack since 2009. Today modern conservatives cling to the claims that Antifa and BLM is an example of the violent left. But this is just a desperate attempt to draw attention away from a faction of the far right that is truly violent. Again, Antifa is a counter-protest group that only comes out to counter-protest fascist groups like the Proud Boys, and yes, they often end in violence as each group will attack each other. Their motives are not inspired by left-wing policies or speech from left-wing leaders. While they have had violent protests and unquestionably conducted themselves in a deplorable manner by attacking reporters, they pale in comparison to other more violent actors and groups. Yes, they are violent and whiny cunts, but they are simply violent whiny cunts who happen to be on the left. Just like the Proud Boys are a group of violent, insecure pansies, hiding behind weapons and shields, and they aren't hard enough to fight a bunch of whiny snowflakes without weapons. That happen to be on the right. Keep in mind that just as their extreme right counterparts, Antifa is a small sample of the population. Both groups are a very small portion of their respected side of the left-right spectrum. The media also does not help the situation. When an attack happens, the media is quick to attach political labels on these atrocities. So they can use them as examples of left or right-wing violence in order to weaponize them to attack the side that attacker happened to be on. instead of the attacker being a lunatic that happens to be on the left or right. There are terrible people on all sides of the political spectrum, and unless a link between political ideology and the attack can be made, then using a terrible person's political leanings as a motivation for an attack is a hasty generalization, a fallacious argument. Let's take a look at a couple other examples of this. On June 14, 2017, some unhinged jackass opened fire on Republican congressmen during a softball practice. Fortunately, the attack had no fatalities but left one congressman, Steve Scalise, injured. The attacker was a Bernie Sanders supporter and even volunteered for the Sanders campaign in 2016. So is there anything in Sanders' messages that would inspire this attack? None that can be found. Sanders is a passionate speaker who can motivate his base very effectively. However, he condones violence at every turn and immediately condemned the attacker and his actions. This is again an example of a shithead who just happened to be on the left. After all, it's not like Bernie Sanders posted a map with crosshairs on the location of the practice with its time and date. Who in their right mind would do something so tone-deaf and idiotic? Sarah Palin, of course, queen of tone-deaf and idiotic. In 2011, Sarah Palin posted this image on social media. The image shows Democratic rallies throughout the United States with crosshairs on each of them. On January 8, one of the rallies on the list was attacked. The attack happened in Arizona when a lone gunman opened fire on the rally, killing 6 including a 9-year-old girl, and injuring 14 including Congresswoman Gabriella Gifford. While many said this action was triggered by Palin's actions, there was no evidence that linked the shooter and Palin's map. Many who knew him said that he didn't pay much attention to the news and the shooter had a fixation with Gifford for years before the attack. There was no reason to assume he even saw the map or was influenced to take action because of it. It is very likely that he would have done this attack regardless of Palin's map. This is again an example of a terrible waste of human skin that just happened to be on the right and not an example of someone becoming violent because of the right. Am I defending Sarah Palin? Absolutely not. Politicians must understand that there are people in this world who are capable of insane levels of violence, and politics can be a source of rage and anger for many people. They must take more consideration over what they say and do because of the influence they hold over people. Now let's take a look at another example and explain why it is a politically motivated attack. On August 3, 2019, a shooter entered a Walmart store and opened fire, killing 22 people and injuring 24 others. While no politician has ever openly asked anyone to carry out these actions, it was clearly motivated by the words of the president. In the shooter's manifesto, there were quotes directly taken from the mouth of President Trump and the state propaganda machines at Fox News. Both have said that Hispanics are invading the country, that they are criminals of the worst kind. They're bringing drugs. They are rapists. The Trump administration has taken steps to dehumanize Hispanics, and this shooter specifically targeted this store because of the high population of Hispanics. Even worse, he chose this day in particular because he knew that families would be shopping there to take advantage of a back-to-school sale. There is a direct link between the actions taken by the shooter and the anti-Hispanic rhetoric of the president. This is why this attack is a right-wing terrorist attack. Another example of this is another shooting, this time at a Planned Parenthood in Colorado on November of 2015. In a testimony, the shooter said that he was a warrior for babies. Right-wing politicians have made false statements that Planned Parenthood kills babies to harvest organs. The shooter was declared to be mentally unstable and is currently confined in a Colorado mental institution. So again, the shooter's actions can be linked directly to right-wing ideologies. As stated before, politicians and medias must take a more considerate and less incendiary approach to the words they use and how they motivate the base to get to the polls. Everyone, even mentally stunted politicians, have free speech. How they use that speech and influence matters. Politicians and media will discuss the role mental health plays in these mass shootings and terroristic attacks, but in the next sentence call their opposition the enemy of the people and a threat to their way of life, stating that these people are their enemy, and knowing that some people listening may have mental illnesses and access to firearms is staggeringly irresponsible. Made worse when you consider the history this country has with shootings. After all, what do you do to enemies? It is tone-deaf at best and purposefully inciting violence at worst. In the past, Donald Trump has claimed the Democrats are a threat to democracy and hate freedom, and his followers have attempted attacks on their lives. He has called the press the enemy of the people, and his supporters have attempted attacks on their lives. He has called Mexicans rape-fueled murder machines, and his supporters have carried out attacks on their lives. These words have motivated and inspired terrorism. And that is the epitome of violence. Violence at a level that doesn't even come close to the actions of a single counter-protest group. It is important to remember that these groups are a small percentage of either end of the left-right spectrum. Because of this, neither side should be considered violent. You must remember that this is only a difference of opinion. Everyone wants their side to win because they think their ideas will work better for the country than the other side's. It is no reason for violence. Americans pride themselves on their patriotism and love of country. You can't love a country if you hate half its population. I understand that people will dispute what I've said in this video, and I am always open to different opinions. If you can present your case logically and respectfully, and cite credible sources, I will change my mind. I hope you can do the same. Thank you for watching, and if you liked what you saw, like and subscribe. Until next time, Hail Sagan.
Try not to hurt him. If you do, I'll defend you in court. Don't worry about it.
What happens, Wolf Blitzer, when somebody pumps rounds into your little pumpkin head?
I'm thinking about killing Michael Moore, and I'm wondering if I could kill him myself or if I would need to hire somebody to do it.
But we are at a breaking point in terms of an emotional civil war with violence that will spill into our streets. It's happening now.
They say, oh, there's a billion of them. I said, so kill 100 million of them.
Well, but I would have been boom, boom, boom. I'll beat that.
Beto O'Rourke does not get to raise my child. And if he tries, I will meet him at the door with a gun.
We, the people, have to have the firepower and the manpower to be able to stand up to tyrants in the government just like this.
Part of the problem and part of the reason it takes so long is nobody wants to hurt each other anymore, right?
Killing people is easier than cooking dinner.